According to the Department of Homeland Security, they're saying that Operation Midway Blitz, since it launched about 2 weeks ago, has detained over 400 folks, although an AP article just came out said it was more like 550.
The story unfolding in Chicago right now is unlike anything the city has seen in years. Over the course of just 2 weeks, more than 400 individuals were taken into federal custody as part of an operation called Midway Blitz. The Department of Homeland Security described it as one of the largest and most sweeping immigration enforcement actions in Chicago's history. While early reports put the number at 400, an Associated Press investigation suggested the real figure may already be closer to 550. Either way, the scale alone set a new benchmark, and the presence of hundreds of federal officers on the ground confirmed that Washington was taking a direct and forceful approach. Hi, before we continue, your one click on the subscribe button fuels all the effort behind this and every future video. Let's break it down exactly how Operation Midway Blitz unfolded, what it means for Chicago, and how it could shape the next chapter of immigration enforcement nationwide. It began quietly, before most Chicago residents were even awake. In suburbs like Park Ridge, armored vans rolled into otherwise quiet neighborhoods. Residents woke up to the sight of families being escorted from their homes, children crying, and federal officers moving quickly and deliberately. By sunrise, dozens of people had already been taken into custody, and this was just the first wave. From that moment, the city understood that Midway Blitz wasn't a small operation. It was a coordinated campaign with serious resources behind it. The Department of Homeland Security later explained how the operation was being run. Acting ICE Chief Marcos Charles revealed that between 50% and 60% of those arrested were considered targeted arrests. These were individuals with files, names, and prior immigration cases. The rest were categorized as collateral arrests, meaning they were picked up during the raids even if they weren't the primary targets. This distinction mattered because under the previous administration, collateral arrests had been restricted. But the policy shift had opened the door for broader detentions, and the outcome in Chicago reflected that change. Not all of those taken into custody had criminal backgrounds. In fact, federal officials acknowledged that less than a third had any prior record. Illinois Senator Dick Durbin pointed out that more than 70% of those detained had no criminal history at all.
Fewer than 30% of those who've been arrested have any kind of criminal background whatsoever. So 70% of the people who are being detained have no criminal record. The president can rant about rapists and murderers and terrorists and criminally insane people coming in as immigrants, but those who are being arrested don't have any indication of that behavior.
For some, that raised questions about whether enforcement had gone too far. But for others, it was evidence that immigration laws were being enforced as written, without hesitation or exception. That split in interpretation set the tone for how the raids would be seen both inside and outside Chicago.
Breaking news, a man is dead and an ICE agent seriously hurt after an immigration arrest ended in gunfire in Franklin Park. Our Suzanne Lemonnier has been poring over surveillance video that captured what happened.
The most tragic moment of the 2 weeks came on September 12th in Franklin Park. A 38-year-old father named Silvario Villegas Gonzalez had just dropped his 2 young children off at school when his car was boxed in by ICE officers. When he tried to flee, officers opened fire. Gonzalez was killed in the driver's seat. ICE stated that he had dragged an officer with his car, leaving the agent no choice but to fire. Critics pointed out that Gonzalez was unarmed and had no record. His death left 2 children without parents, and it quickly became a rallying point for those opposed to the raids. Federal officials defended the incident, explaining that agents must make split-second decisions when their safety is at risk. They argued that the shooting was justified under the circumstances, pointing to the danger faced by the officer on the ground. Civil rights attorneys disagreed, describing it as an unnecessary use of force. The disagreement reflected the broader national debate, whether aggressive immigration enforcement enhances security or undermines trust in law enforcement. Meanwhile, Chicago's leaders became more vocal as the raids intensified. Illinois Lieutenant Governor Juliana Stratton called the operation a sick reality show.
I mean, first of all, we do know the name of this sick reality show, the Midway Blitz,
and warned that families were now too afraid to send their kids to school. Storefronts in immigrant-heavy neighborhoods reported fewer customers, and some cultural celebrations, like Mexican Independence Day, were canceled altogether out of fear. Mayor Brandon Johnson went even further, labeling law enforcement itself as a sickness, a statement that drew sharp criticism. To federal officials, such comments signaled hostility toward officers simply carrying out their duties. To the mayor's supporters, it was a defense of his community. As the raids unfolded, tensions between city and federal officials escalated. President Trump himself weighed in, describing Johnson as grossly incompetent and suggesting stronger federal action might soon follow. ICE reinforced its message by publicizing high-profile arrests, such as the detention of Aldo Salazar Bahina, a convicted murderer who had recently been released from prison. Federal officials highlighted this case as proof that immigration enforcement protected communities by preventing dangerous individuals from returning to the streets. At the same time, protests grew in size. Downtown rallies saw immigrant advocates demanding IICE agents remove their masks and show identification. That call eventually inspired proposed legislation known as the No Secret Police Act, designed to require officers to reveal their identities during operations. Supporters argued this would improve accountability, but Homeland Security officials opposed it, pointing out that assaults against agents had risen by more than 1,000% in recent years. They argued anonymity was essential for officer safety and for protecting their families from retaliation. Law enforcement veterans strongly backed that position, stressing that undercover work and operational security depend on protecting identities. Chicago wasn't chosen at random. Analysts noted that sanctuary cities were often the focus of major immigration operations, both as a matter of symbolism and strategy. Cities like Boston and Los Angeles had already experienced similar raids, and Chicago was seen as both a defiant city and a high-profile example. The message was clear: federal enforcement would not be softened by local policies, and cooperation was expected. That set the stage for a national expansion of operations like Midway Blitz. The legal landscape shifted at the same time. In a landmark decision, the Supreme Court sided with the administration by allowing broader discretion in immigration stops, even when race or ethnicity factored into the decision. Civil rights groups warned this ruling would encourage profiling and put minority communities at risk. But for federal officials, the ruling provided legal clarity and reinforced their authority to act swiftly. The balance between civil liberties and enforcement had tipped further toward enforcement, and Midway Blitz became the first major test of that new reality. By the end of 2 weeks, the numbers were staggering. More than 500 people had been detained. 2 U.S. citizens had briefly been caught in the sweep, later released after confirming their status. And yet, ICE officials continued to point to successes: dangerous offenders removed, fugitives located, and immigration laws enforced. Chicago was left with a divided response. For some residents, the sight of federal officers in their neighborhoods was unsettling, a reminder that immigration enforcement could touch anyone at any time. For others, it was a sign of strength, proof that promises of tougher enforcement were being fulfilled. And for ICE itself, the operation was framed as both a demonstration of capability and a warning that no city was beyond reach.